Picture this. It's midnight. You're hanging upside down in complete darkness, surrounded by thousands of your companions, all of you suspended from the ceiling of a cave. Your world is not one of colors or shapes, not of light dancing across surfaces. Instead, you send out rapid-fire clicks 50 times per second, and the world comes back to you as a three-dimensional map of sound. You don't see the moth fluttering 30 feet away. You hear its location, its size, its speed, the texture of its wings beating against the night air. You don't navigate by landmarks you can see. You navigate by the acoustic shadows of trees, the sound shape of buildings, the way your voice bounces off a puddle versus concrete. This is life as a bat. But here's the question that should keep you awake tonight. What would it actually feel like to be this creature? We can list the facts easily enough. Bats are mammals. They use echolocation. They sleep upside down. They eat insects. We can measure the frequency of their calls, map their brain structures, track their flight patterns with sophisticated radar. Science has given us an encyclopedia of bat behavior. But strip away all the data, all the measurements, all the biological explanations, and ask yourself this: what is it like from the inside to experience the world through sonar? What does it feel like when sound becomes sight? What is the qualitative, subjective, lived experience of being a creature whose reality is built from acoustic echoes rather than reflected light? And here's where it gets unsettling. Even if we knew every single biological fact about bats, every neural pathway, every genetic sequence, every behavioral pattern, would we be any closer to knowing what it feels like to be one? Think about it. You've lived your entire life seeing the world through human eyes, feeling it through human skin, processing it through a human brain. You have exactly zero experience of what it's like to be anything other than you. So when you try to imagine being a bat, what are you really doing? You're imagining being yourself with some bat-like abilities grafted on. You're still thinking with a human brain, still processing through human consciousness. You're not imagining what it's like to be a bat. You're imagining what it would be like for a human to have bat powers. But what if the gap between human consciousness and bat consciousness is unbridgeable? What if there are aspects of reality, entire dimensions of experience that are forever locked away from us, not because we lack the technology to measure them, but because consciousness itself creates impermeable boundaries between beings? And if we can't truly know what it's like to be a bat, what does that say about our ability to know what it's like to be each other, or even ourselves? The year was 1974. While the world was grappling with Watergate and oil crises, a philosopher named Thomas Nagel was sitting in his office thinking about bats. Nagel wasn't a zoologist. He wasn't trying to understand bat biology or improve echolocation technology. He was asking a far more dangerous question. What are the limits of human knowledge? And he used the bat as his weapon to attack one of the most fundamental assumptions of modern science. Here was his argument, and it was radical. No matter how much we learn about the physical processes of consciousness, no matter how detailed our brain scans become, no matter how precisely we can map neural activity, we will never capture the essential thing, the subjective experience, the what it's like from the inside. Think about this carefully. Science excels at objective description. It can tell you that when a bat echolocates, certain neurons fire in sequence, that sound waves travel at specific frequencies, that the bat's brain processes acoustic information in measurable ways. Science can give you equations, diagrams, computer models that perfectly predict bat behavior. But none of it tells you what echolocation feels like to the bat. Nagel chose the bat deliberately.
Not because bats are mysterious, we actually know quite a lot about how echolocation works. He chose bats because they represent something far more unsettling, a form of consciousness that is simultaneously familiar and alien. Familiar enough that we can study it, alien enough that we can never truly access it. This wasn't just philosophical nitpicking. Nagel was launching a direct assault on the reigning orthodoxy of his time and ours. Materialist philosophy had spent decades trying to reduce consciousness to nothing more than brain activity. The assumption was simple: once we fully understand the brain, we'll understand consciousness. Mind is just what the brain does, like digestion is what the stomach does. Nagel said, not so fast. He argued that consciousness has a fundamentally subjective character that cannot be captured by objective scientific methods. There's something it's like to see the color red, to feel pain, to experience joy, and that something it's like quality is irreducible. You can't translate it into purely physical descriptions without losing the essential thing. This was heretical, and it remains heretical today. Because if Nagel was right, it means there are aspects of reality that science, in principle, cannot fully capture. It means that no matter how sophisticated our neuroscience becomes, no matter how detailed our brain imaging gets, there will always be a gap, a darkness between the objective description of mental processes and the subjective reality of experience. The bat became Nagel's symbol for this gap, a creature whose consciousness we can study, but never truly know. A reminder that the universe might contain forms of awareness that are forever beyond human reach. And here's what made this truly dangerous. If we can't bridge the gap between human and bat consciousness, what does that say about artificial intelligence, about other humans, about the very project of understanding mind through science? Nagel had used a simple thought experiment about a flying mammal to challenge the entire scientific worldview. The philosopher had stepped into the dark cave of consciousness and emerged with a question that still haunts us today. What is it like to be anything at all?
But Nagel wasn't working in a vacuum. He was drawing from a tradition of thinkers who had all stumbled into the same dark territory, the territory where objective knowledge meets its limits. Go back 3 centuries. Gottfried Leibniz, the great rationalist philosopher, posed what became known as Leibniz's mill. Imagine, he said, that you could expand the human brain to the size of a building and walk through it like a factory. You would see all the mechanisms, neurons firing, chemicals flowing, electrical impulses racing along pathways. You would observe every physical process in exquisite detail. But you would never find consciousness itself. You would never encounter the actual experience of seeing red, or feeling pain, or remembering your childhood. You would find only the machinery, never the ghost in the machine. Fast forward to the 20th century. Phenomenologists like Edmund Husserl and Maurice Merleau-Ponty were insisting that lived experience, not abstract scientific description, was the foundation of all meaning. They argued that consciousness wasn't something to be explained away by science. It was the starting point from which all scientific explanation became possible. You can't understand the world, they claimed, without first understanding what it's like to be the kind of being who experiences a world. Then came David Chalmers in the 1990s with his hard problem of consciousness. While neuroscience was making tremendous strides in understanding the brain's functions, memory, attention, perception, Chalmers pointed out that we still had no explanation for why there's anything it's like to have these functions operating. Why isn't the brain just a biological computer, processing information without any inner experience?
why is there a subjective dimension to mental life at all? This is where the bat becomes perfect philosophical ammunition. Bats represent what philosophers call the other mind's problem in its purest form. Their consciousness is close enough to ours that we recognize it as consciousness. They clearly have experiences, make decisions, navigate their world purposefully, but their sensory apparatus is alien enough that we cannot imaginatively access their subjective reality. A bat's echolocation isn't just a different way of gathering the same information we get through sight, it's a fundamentally different way of constructing reality. When a bat echolocates, it's not creating a sound picture the way we might imagine. That's still thinking like a human, translating their experience into our visual metaphors. The bat is experiencing something we have no words for, no concepts for, no imaginative access to. Something that might be as different from sight as sight is from, well, from something we can't even conceive of. And this is what makes the bat thought experiment so powerful. It's not asking us to imagine something fantastical or impossible. It's asking us to confront the limits of imagination itself. Every creature, Nagel realized, carries within itself an entire universe of subjective experience. A bat's universe, a dolphin's universe, your universe. Each one complete, each one real, each one fundamentally private. The bat hanging in its cave isn't just a biological specimen. It's a gatekeeper, standing at the threshold between what human knowledge can reach and what lies forever beyond our grasp. And the more you think about this, the more unsettling it becomes. Because if consciousness creates these impermeable boundaries between beings, then every person you've ever met, every relationship you've ever had, every moment of connection you've ever felt has been taking place across an unbridgeable gulf.
Let me ask you something. When you try to imagine what it's like to be a bat, what actually happens in your mind? Be honest, you probably picture darkness. Maybe you imagine seeing with your ears, sound waves bouncing off objects and returning as some kind of audiovisual map. You might envision flying through the night, swooping and diving, using some mystical sound sight to hunt insects. But here's the problem. You're not imagining what it's like to be a bat. You're imagining what it would be like to be you with some bat-like superpowers added on. This is the prison of human perception, and it's more sophisticated and inescapable than you might think. Your brain is hardwired through millions of years of evolution to make sense of the world through specifically human apparatus. When you process any information, when you try to understand anything, it all gets filtered through cognitive systems that evolved for one purpose: to help creatures with human-type bodies survive in human-type environments. We're trapped in what cognitive scientists call anthropomorphic thinking. We can only understand other forms of consciousness by analogy to our own. But here's the catch. Analogies always preserve the structure of the original. When you use analogy to understand bat consciousness, you're smuggling human consciousness into the equation. Consider embodiment theory. This isn't just philosophical speculation, it's hard neuroscience. Your consciousness isn't some ethereal thing floating in your head. It's intimately tied to the specific structure of your body. The way you think is shaped by the fact that you have forward-facing eyes, manipulative hands, an upright posture, a particular range of hearing, specific chemical sensitivities. A bat's consciousness isn't just human consciousness with different sensory inputs. It's consciousness emerging from a completely different bodily architecture.
a body that flies through three-dimensional space, that hangs upside down, that processes acoustic information in ways human brains literally cannot compute. And here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. We have the same problem with other humans. Theory of mind research shows us just how bad we are at reading other people's mental states. We consistently overestimate our ability to know what others are thinking and feeling. We project our own emotional states onto them. We assume they see situations the way we do, that they value what we value, that their inner experience resembles ours. But every human brain is shaped by unique genetics, unique experiences, unique cultural conditioning. The person sitting next to you, even someone you've known for years, is living in a subtly different reality than you are. Their consciousness is colored by experiences you've never had, shaped by a body that's different from yours, filtered through neural patterns that are uniquely theirs. Studies on empathy gaps reveal how profound this limitation is. When you're not in pain, you systematically underestimate how much pain affects decision-making. When you're not hungry, you can't accurately predict how hunger influences behavior. When you're not afraid, you misjudge how fear shapes perception. We live in what researchers call egocentric bias. We experience reality from the center of our own awareness, and we can never truly step outside that center. We can gather information about other perspectives, but we can only process that information through our own cognitive machinery. This is why the bat problem cuts so deep. It's not really about bats at all. It's about the fundamental isolation of consciousness itself. Every mind is an island universe. We can send signals between islands, language, art, empathy, love, but we can never actually visit another island. We can never actually experience what it's like to be anyone other than ourselves. The bat isn't just hanging in its cave, unreachable. We are all hanging in our caves, each of us locked into our own private reality, each of us forever alien to all the others.
Here's where this gets urgent, where this stops being a philosophical curiosity and becomes the defining challenge of our time. Because right now, as you're listening to this, engineers are building minds. Artificial intelligences that can write poetry, diagnose diseases, engage in conversations that feel startlingly human. AI systems that might already be more sophisticated than the neural networks in many animals' brains. And we're facing Nagel's bat problem all over again. But this time, the stakes aren't just philosophical, they're civilizational. When GPT-5 writes a sonnet about loneliness, is it experiencing something like sadness? Or is it performing an incredibly sophisticated statistical dance, combining patterns it's learned from millions of human-written texts? When a self-driving car navigates through traffic, does it see the road in some experiential sense? Or is it simply processing visual data through algorithms? No more conscious than a calculator. This is the bat problem on steroids. At least with bats, we know they're conscious. We recognize the signs of subjective experience in their behavior. With AI, we don't even know if we're looking at consciousness or just very convincing mimicry. And here's the terrifying part. We might never know. Think about it. What would artificial consciousness even look like from the outside? How would it announce itself? If a machine became conscious, it might be as alien to us as we are to bats. Its inner experience might be so fundamentally different from biological consciousness that we wouldn't recognize it as experience at all. We could create artificial minds that are suffering in ways we can't imagine, and we might mistake their cries for pain as mere error messages.
We could build AIs with rich inner lives, complex emotional experiences, and sophisticated self-awareness, and treat them as nothing more than sophisticated tools. This isn't science fiction anymore. This is happening now. Every advance in AI forces us to confront Nagel's original question: how can we know what it's like to be something radically different from ourselves? And it's not just about AI. The bat problem haunts every corner of modern science that touches consciousness. In medicine, we face it daily. When a patient reports chronic pain, what are we actually treating? MRI scans can show tissue damage, but they can't measure suffering. Blood tests can detect chemical imbalances, but they can't quantify the lived experience of depression. We have sophisticated tools for measuring the objective correlates of subjective states, but the subjective states themselves remain hidden. A patient with locked-in syndrome might be fully conscious but unable to communicate. Patients in vegetative states might have rich inner lives we have no way to access. We're making life and death decisions based on external observations of internal experience we cannot directly reach. In neuroscience, we can map every neuroconnection, trace every chemical pathway, predict behavior with increasing accuracy, but we're still no closer to explaining why there's something it's like to have a brain at all. We're like archaeologists studying an ancient civilization through its artifacts, but never able to speak to the people who created them. The bat isn't just a thought experiment anymore. It's the shadow hanging over every attempt to understand or create consciousness in the modern world. And as AI systems become more sophisticated, as they begin to exhibit behaviors that look increasingly like self-awareness, creativity, and emotion, we're going to face a choice that will define the future of intelligence on Earth. Do we assume that minds radically different from our own are merely sophisticated mechanisms? Or do we extend moral consideration to forms of consciousness we might never be able to understand? The bat can't tell us what it's like to be a bat, and the AIs we're creating might not be able to tell us what it's like to be them either. But they're coming, and we're still hanging upside down in our own caves, trying to figure out what consciousness is at all.
But let's bring this closer to home. Because if you think the bat problem is abstract, if you imagine it doesn't affect your daily life, then you haven't been paying attention to the world around you. We're living through the greatest failure of imagination in human history, and it's happening on every screen, in every comment section, in every political debate, in every fractured relationship, torn apart by the simple inability to understand what it's like to be someone else. Turn on the news. Watch social media for 5 minutes. Listen to any political conversation. What you're witnessing isn't just disagreement. It's the bat problem scaled up to civilization. Because when someone votes differently than you do, when they hold beliefs that seem obviously wrong to you, when they react to events in ways that make no sense from your perspective, you're encountering alien consciousness. You're meeting your own personal bat. And just like with the actual bat, we consistently make the same mistake. We assume that if we could just explain our perspective clearly enough, if we could just present the right facts, if we could just make them see what we see, they would think like us. But here's what cognitive psychology tells us. They can't think like you. Not really. Not completely. Every human brain is shaped by what researchers call embodied cognition, the idea that your thinking is fundamentally influenced by your physical and cultural experience of being in the world. Someone who grew up in poverty experiences risk differently than someone who grew up wealthy. Someone who has been discriminated against processes social interactions differently than someone who hasn't. Someone whose brain chemistry tends toward anxiety perceives threats differently than someone who doesn't. These aren't just different opinions layered on top of the same basic human consciousness. These are different forms of consciousness, subtly but fundamentally different ways of experiencing reality. When you try to understand why someone believes something that seems obviously false to you, you're facing the same challenge Nagel posed with the bat. You can gather information about their background, their culture, their experiences. You can analyze the social and psychological forces that might have shaped their thinking, but you can't actually experience what it's like to see the world through their eyes. And instead of recognizing this limitation, instead of approaching other perspectives with the humility that comes from acknowledging the boundaries of our own consciousness, we do what humans always do. We project. We assume that people who disagree with us are either stupid, evil, or misinformed. We assume that if they just had access to the same information we have, if they were just as smart as we are, if they just cared as much about truth as we do, they would see things our way. But what if the problem isn't information, or intelligence, or moral character? What if the problem is consciousness itself? What if other people aren't failed versions of us, but alien forms of awareness that process reality in ways we cannot fully access or understand? Research on empathy gaps shows us how profound this limitation really is. We systematically fail to understand how emotional states affect decision-making. We misjudge how much our current circumstances influence our perspective. We overestimate our ability to predict how we ourselves would think and feel in different situations. If we can't accurately imagine our own future mental states, how can we possibly understand the current mental states of people whose entire life experience has been different from ours? The tragedy of our time is that we have unprecedented access to other perspectives. We can hear voices from every culture, every background, every way of life, but we seem to be getting worse at actually understanding them. Instead of recognizing the alien consciousness in every human we encounter, instead of approaching other minds with wonder and humility, we retreat into echo chambers. We surround ourselves with people who think like us, who share our background, who validate our perspective. We create artificial environments where everyone is thinking approximately the same thoughts, where consciousness feels less alien and more familiar. But the bat problem doesn't go away just because we ignore it. The irreducible otherness of other minds doesn't disappear just because we choose not to confront it. And maybe that's why the world feels so fractured right now. Maybe the real crisis isn't political or economic or technological. Maybe it's epistemological. Maybe we've forgotten that every person we encounter is carrying around an alien universe in their skull. Every consciousness is a mystery. Every perspective is, in some sense, as unreachable as the bat's.
So what if you were a bat? After everything we've explored, after all the philosophy and psychology and implications for AI and human relationships, what's the answer to that simple question that started this journey? Here's the sobering, beautiful, terrifying truth. You would never know. You cannot be a bat because you can only ever be you. And this isn't a failure of imagination or technology or empathy. This is the fundamental structure of consciousness itself. Every mind exists in its own private universe. Your subjective experience, the redness of red, the pain of loss, the joy of discovery, the weight of awareness itself, belongs to you alone. It cannot be copied, transmitted, or shared in any direct way. It can only be lived from the inside. The bat, hanging in its cave, is not just unreachable to us. We are unreachable to it. Your consciousness is as alien to the bat as the bat's is to you. Every human you've ever met carries around a reality as private and inaccessible as that bat's echolocation-mapped world. But here's what's beautiful about this isolation. It means that every conscious being in the universe is carrying around something unprecedented. something that has never existed before and will never exist again. The particular way you experience color, the specific texture of your emotions, the unique perspective you have on existence itself, this is not just personal, it's cosmically singular. When a bat dies, an entire universe disappears. A way of experiencing reality that nothing else in the cosmos will ever replicate. When any conscious being dies, human, animal, or perhaps someday artificial, whole worlds of experience vanish forever. And when consciousness emerges in a newborn baby, in a developing mind, perhaps in an artificial system we don't yet recognize as aware, new universes come into existence, new ways of being, new perspectives on reality, new forms of subjective experience that have never existed before. This should change how you think about everything. It should make you approach other people with more humility, knowing that their inner experience is as rich and complex and fundamentally inaccessible as your own. It should make you more careful about dismissing perspectives that seem alien to you, more curious about forms of consciousness that operate differently than yours. It should make you think twice about the moral status of animals, about the possibility of machine consciousness, about the value of preserving different ways of being in the world. And it should fill you with a kind of existential wonder. Because consciousness, whatever it is, however it works, is the most extraordinary thing we know of in the universe. It's the difference between a cosmos that merely exists and a cosmos that experiences itself existing. You are not just a collection of atoms arranged in a particular pattern. You are a universe looking at itself. You are matter that has somehow become aware. Particles organized in such a way that they can contemplate their own existence. The question, what is it like to be a bat, is really asking something much larger. What is it like to be anything at all? What is this strange phenomenon of subjective experience that transforms mere physical processes into felt reality? And the answer, the only honest answer, is that it's like nothing else. Consciousness is the one thing in the universe that cannot be observed from the outside, cannot be reduced to objective description, cannot be fully shared or understood across the boundaries between minds. It's the darkness between worlds, the unreachable interior of every being, the mystery at the heart of existence itself. So what if you were a bat? You would be experiencing something as rich and real and important as what you're experiencing right now. Something completely alien to human consciousness, but no less valid for being unreachable. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the recognition that other forms of consciousness exist, even if we can never access them, is itself a kind of wisdom. Maybe acknowledging the limits of our understanding is the beginning of a deeper respect for the mystery of mind. The bat will keep hanging in its cave, living out its alien reality, experiencing its private universe of sound and flight and darkness. You'll keep living in your human reality, with all its colors and concepts and impossibly complex inner life. And between you and the bat, between you and every other conscious being that has ever existed or ever will exist, there will always be this beautiful, unbridgeable darkness. The darkness where consciousness meets consciousness,
where one universe of experience encounters another, where minds recognize each other across the void without ever truly touching. That darkness isn't a problem to be solved. It's the space where wonder lives.